Welcome to the second session.
Let's try, because if you think and think, try to.
Welcome again. This is the problem when people don't switch off the microphones. Okay, thank you. Welcome to the second session. We had a successful session this morning, and this afternoon we have about 130 people registered. So I'm sure they'll be joining in from as we go along. We have, for this afternoon session, we have 3 great speakers. Just give us a second. There are quite a number of people still trying to join in. So for this afternoon, the session on environment, economics, and business, we have 3 great speakers, all familiar names and very experienced professionals. Our first speaker is Dr. Yasmin Rashid, who's now the Director of Sustainability at Lendlease Malaysia.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, I'm sure you all know Yasmin. She's also the founder of EcoNights, the NGO that has done great work, particularly working with youth. And they are the people behind the KL Eco Film Festival, the successful film festival that has been going on for 12 years, I believe. 13 years.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, this year is our 13th year. Thanks.
Yes.
Hi, everyone.
And Yasmin is also, again, well known, as won multiple awards. In 2017, I think, Yasmin, you won the 30 Women Leaders of Malaysia at the Golden Globe Tigers Award, I believe.
Yes, correct,
And
Dr.
then
Bala.
a year earlier, you won the Women Icon Award, or was it the? Yeah, you have long list awards.
Yeah, I also don't quite remember, Dr. Bala, but yeah, along those lines.
Yeah, so it's great to have
Thank
Yasmin with us today.
Thank
Our
you.
second speaker is none other than Shah Reza Hussain, who's currently the director of the Perak State Park Corporation. Shah Reza is, of course, multi-talented. Now he's with the government, but he has been with the private sector. He has been with the NGO. He has been with everyone. And he's a very passionate person when it comes to environment and conservation. And I think the Perak State Corporation now is doing great under his leadership. Yep, Reza, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Bala. I feel
Our,
small amongst the big giants here.
you are a giant. Our third speaker is Dato Daryl Weber. Dato Daryl Weber is currently the Managing Director of Global Forest Strategies at the Earth Innovation Institute. I think more people will remember Daryl from his stint at the as the Secretary General of RSPO. He was there for 8 years. And I think if you speak to people at RSPO, I think Dato Daryl's stint there was a very productive stint. I think the membership of RSPO increased from 300 to 4,000 during his tenure as the SecGen, and that is a major achievement. Thanks very much, Daryl, for joining us.
Thank you, Bala, for the opportunity to have my say, I guess.
Yes. So we have 3 great speakers, and all you guys at the forum, you will have opportunity to ask questions as we go along. If you want to ask, just put it in the chat and I will make sure that your question gets answered, right? This session is currently being live streamed on YouTube. So we have lots of people watching there. And once again, before we start, please mute your microphone and video to make the experience pleasant for everyone. So ladies and gentlemen, before we go to the speakers, I'd just like to share with you some information to set the tone for today's forum, right? As we all know, the world is changing. And three of the biggest drivers of change are demographics, climate change, and technology. Well, this one I think. Population is increasing across the globe. It's increasing in Malaysia. Climate change is affecting almost everything that we do, the way we do business, the way we manage our environment. And technology, again, technology is moving so fast that what is current today becomes obsolete tomorrow. And these are the three main drivers that is changing the way we live, we work, and the way that we manage the environment, in the coming decades. Let's take Malaysia, for example. Our population is about 32, 33 million now, or 34. And this is projected to reach 46 million in 2050. So that's about 12 billion extra people in the country who, of course, need to be fed, need to have their houses, their education, and so on. And the population is becoming more urban. The population of Malaysia is projected to be 87% urban by 2050. That's almost the entire population living in cities. Our GDP is projected roughly to triple by 2050, assuming this COVID thing doesn't cause too much trouble. The structure of the economy itself is changing. The primary sector, which was the main driver of our economy post-independence, is now declining, and the services sector is quickly rising, and now I believe it accounts for almost 2/3 of our GDP. So the structure of our economy itself is changing. And all these have implication on how we manage our environment, how we manage our forests, land, and so on. But with this, with the rapid rise in population, with the increase in size of the economic activities, our environmental challenges are also increasingly becoming complex, right? What used to be a simple problem of pollution of the rivers has become a lot more complex these days. And I think all of us are struggling to manage these challenges. At the same time, we're also losing a big chunk of our heritage. Our forest cover, our biodiversity, coral reefs, fish, wildlife, all of these are declining over time, despite the efforts put in by government, NGOs, private sector. Despite all our effort, these are declining over time. And there doesn't seem to be any light at the end of the tunnel, because it seems as though the loss cannot be halted. And that brings us to the topic of our forum today. We talk about economics, business, and environment. In recent years, or at least in the past decade, I think there's realization that you cannot separate economics from the environment. You cannot manage environment in isolation. And similarly, you cannot manage our economy without looking at environment. And all these terminologies, sustainable financing to market failures to natural resources accounting, all these have been discussed, debated, thrown about, and with little success. We have some success, but many of these are still at the theoretical stage. We have many issues when it comes to government financing. The issue of how state governments who are responsible for forests and natural resources are struggling to finance those has also been debated in the past. I just like to show you this chart. Okay, this is an interesting chart. This chart compares, I just picked one state, which is Pahang, one of the largest states in Malaysia, which has a huge forest cover, has a population of 1.7 million. The Pahang state government's revenue is about 600 million. Not even 1 billion, it's only 600 million for the entire state. And this chart compares the Pahang state government's revenue with that of selected private companies. See, all these private companies earn many times more than the entire Pahang state government. And the Pahang state government is responsible for managing an entire state. And these three circles here highlights the scale of the revenue, how small a state government's revenue is compared to selected private companies. When it comes to business and environment, I think we have seen a significant rise in the participation of private companies, private businesses in managing environment, both from managing their own impacts and to contribute towards the national agenda. So we are seeing an increase in private sector participation. Of course, we like to see more. So this afternoon, we have 3 speakers who are going to touch on some or all of these topics. How we can better incorporate environmental planning into economics and economics into environmental planning. How can the businesses contribute better towards environmental management? How can the private sector take lead in managing our environment, right? So with that, I'm going to turn my attention to the speakers now. We are going to start with Dr. Yasmin. Yeah. Yasmin, that's because you have
Hi.
won many. That's because you have won many awards. So I'm starting with you. Okay, Yasmin.
Yes.
Okay. Based on your own experience and the work that you do now, what do you think are the likely key challenges in safeguarding our environment in the next 2 decades, given the rapid globalization, the changing economy, the expanding population, and climate change? What do you think are the main challenges in the coming decades? But before you go there, maybe you can share with everyone the kind of work that you do now, and then go ahead and explain the challenges that you see.
Yeah, so hi everyone. I think a little bit of explanation from my part as well, because I think I've moved to a whole different sector with the private sector now. And I'm also in a sector that is perhaps number 2 or number 3 in terms of the most polluting, most carbon emission to the environment, which is the construction side. So I currently lead the country sustainability team in Landlease, Malaysia. And if you're aware, we have a new development that is being constructed called TRX City, which is going to be the next financial district or precinct in Kuala Lumpur. So one of the major tasks is actually to design sustainability strategies that work throughout planning, development, construction, and operations of TRX. And I would say one of the reasons why I chose this company, and I've also been very familiar with them, worked with them before as partners, is how I find sustainability as a DNA has been quite imprinted in the organization. So if you're aware, Landlease construct sustainable buildings. And one of the latest efforts that we have completed is a precinct development in Barangaroo in Australia. It is the first carbon neutral development in Australia, which is built by Landlease. This was a good, actually positive sign. I did extensive research on their work first before joining them. And I felt over the years that one of the biggest challenge is in moving and shaking the private sector. So the calling came where I thought, and the short amount of time I have, whatever time I have, that I would play my part in trying to operationalize the impact sustainability in Landlease, try to be impactful, transparent, try to also demonstrate good governance while we roll out sustainability initiatives in this development. So to answer your question, Dr. Bala, about what I feel the key challenge, I only have one key challenge to name. But when I address this key challenge, I think a whole other dimension of relevant subject matters come into play. So one key challenge, which clearly is related to the industry that I am in right now, is working towards a decarbonized economy. But a decarbonized economy, decarbonization itself, is a very systemic issue and requires us to look at not just economic opportunities, but also on social, changes in the social scape. And what I mean by this, which Dr. Bala has already highlighted, population growth is a pressing issue, which I kind of still find perplexed. Not many people are talking about it. Migration from rural areas to urban areas, and you're right, 87% of the Malaysian population would be centered in cities. So the stress on cities are going to be enormous in the near future. There is an urgent need to look at how we need to climate-proof our development in cities and how to build resilient communities. And I think another subject matter, which I'm not sure will be brought up, but I'm bringing it up now as well, while we look at the act of working towards a decarbonized activity, we look into equation the role of the government, we look into equation the role of the private sector. And I think I'd like to plead to all the audience here to look into the role of us as individuals as well. Because there are a lot of domains in the social scape which can be controlled by us significantly. We have the right numbers to drive these changes. I hope I've been clear, Dr. Bala. Over to you. Or should I continue?
Hang on. Yeah, before I move on to Shah, you have worked in the civil society NGO sphere for a very long time, and now in the private sector. Can you share what is the biggest difference in terms of outlook or mindset towards managing the environment?
Managing the environment must be profitable. Sustainability must be profitable.
Yep.
If it's profitable, you do more. And that's how we are projecting our work. So we have a 2% of our profit is dedicated to work towards social impact. Our goal is to increase that margin for social impact to significant more percentages. But to do that, to provide more social impact interventions for communities, especially in areas that we develop, requires us to also have a very strong business profitable sense to it. That's one thing I've learned very clearly from day one stepping in.
Yep.
Another dimension, just a quick one. Another dimension is stakeholder management. Maybe I'll touch a little bit on that later.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now let's move to Shah. Okay, Shah has also worked in the private sector, civil society, now in the government. Shah, again, maybe you can share a bit of your work at the Perak State Park Corporation, and then let's move on to the question of what do you think are the key challenges?
Okay, thank you, Bala. Let me just adjust this. Okay, hi, good afternoon, everybody. Hi, Yasmin. Yasmin was my colleague in WWF more than 20 years ago. So anyway, my name is Shahredza. I am currently with the Perak State Park Corporation. I am basically looking after all the protected areas and state parks, Royal Belum State Park, Pulau Sembilan State Park, Kinta Nature Park, all the protected areas. I am in my ranger suit because my rangers are doing wildlife anti-poaching protection as we speak. They are in the forest. They are in very, very difficult terrain, but they stick to their job. And now that we are in Bulan Puasa, in Ramadan, the rangers are out 10 to 14 days every month doing wildlife patrol. So I am in KL, I am in a comfortable zone, but I am in my ranger uniform just to be in spirit with them. Okay, so Dr. Bala, yes, my journey into conservation is a long one, but I have worked with private entity. I have run my own business and tech startup. I have worked with big international NGOs like WWF. I was the executive director of Malaysian Nature Society, the oldest and largest environment-based society in Malaysia. But and I've also worked in public listed companies. I was with the Peremba group as a GM there. And so I have a mix. I have a good mix of conservation and business. And by the way, I am a graduate. My training is in economics. My first degree is in applied economics from the UK. So I am very well familiar with economic concept, and I'm trying to look at it into how we bring it into the environment, especially into the natural environment, which is our forest and our ecosystem. But today I'm going to put my economic hat on and take off my wildlife conservation hat. Uh, for me personally, the whole global economic order has to change. That's it. We are pushing very much a consumption-based free economy or consumption-based capitalism. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Capitalism does not need to be negative, but we have to move away from this economic order. It just is not sustainable for the planet. It is not sustainable for human beings, and it is not sustainable for human equity. You know, the premise of the current model now is that people can consume as much as possible. And we think that we have a choice to actually consume what we want. But subtly, we are actually being programmed and we are being artificially intelligent to make choices that we necessarily need not understand that we are making. Because corporation now, business now, enterprise now runs on the maxim of maximizing profit, or at the core of big corporates is maximizing returns to shareholder. So maximizing return to shareholder means that whoever runs the organization, the CEO, the corporate, the executive chairman, they need to do the best in terms of providing returns to their shareholders. In doing so, they would not they would not have much time to think about environmental impact, social impact, equitable justice to workers. That is why we see that cost of that production move to the places where the cost is lowest. You know, when the cost was cheap in China, everybody moved their production to China. When their cost is cheap in Vietnam, everybody moved their cost of production to Vietnam. The reason they do this is so that they can produce goods and services at cheap and low prices so that people can continue wanting to buy and have the ability to buy. The problem is the cost of producing the goods are actually much higher than what is sold in the market, because the real cost of production, the real cost of the production vis-a-vis the environment, the social impact is not taken into account. That's why Linus is here. If Linus were to produce their rare earth in Australia, it probably costs them 10 or 20 times more because they need to comply with so many stringent regulations that you make their production so expensive and appears to be non-viable. So they move to places where the cost of production in terms of environment is lower. It's as simple as that. They move uh, Nike, Adidas, or whoever else, garment factories, fashion industries, move their factories to Bangladesh, to Vietnam, to remote areas of Indonesia, because the labor is cheap. The labor is cheap, but that is in a way exploiting the laborers. So they are, what we buy do not reflect the true cost. My phone, which I bought for 2,000, will probably cost 10 or 15,000 if all the exact cost is put into it. So my premise is this consumption-based economics or business model that is pushed to us as consumers is not sustainable for human being. It's not sustainable for nature. So we need to move into a more sustainable business model. My premise today is to question and to look into how we can look into a better economic model, a better business model. And what I think that we should look at, and Yasmin is an expert in this area, even though she didn't have time to speak about it, is to look into the area of social enterprise or social cooperation if it's huge, because we need to be able to do business that is ethical, do business that has a return to the community, to the people. We need to have a business or economic model where return to shareholder and maximizing profit is not the first priority. It has to make money, but it is not the first priority, and not at the expense of the environment, not at the expense of the workers, not at the expense of society. It has to work on the premise of giving service back. Many years ago, long time ago, doing business is a service. It's a service to the community. And this mindset has changed into maximizing my profit. You know, people like Muhammad Yunus, building social business, people doing sacred commerce. These are people who put who put sacredness, who put society first in their model of business. Their model of business is to give back to society, and then while doing that, make some money. So I don't want to take too much time, but I just want us to question how we consume. I want us to question whether this consumption-based free market is the way forward for planet Earth, but more so for human beings, because planet Earth will survive, and it has survived for 4.5 billion years. It's us species that is not adapting, and we are actually killing ourselves. So there's so much more details, but I will give it back to you, Dr. Bala.
Okay, thank you, Shah. That was very profound and very passionate plea. I believe the move towards social enterprise has started, and there will be more in the years to come. But it's still a very minority compared to the mainstream businesses. So with that, I'm going to now to Dr. Daryl Weber. Daryl, maybe again you can share a bit on what you are doing now, and then maybe go into what you think are the key challenges in the coming decades. Daryl?
Thank you, Bala. Let me just, I lied to you when I said I didn't have a presentation. I now have a presentation. So let me just see if I can bring it up on screen. Can you see it already?
Yes, I see it.
Okay, so I was the CEO for the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil for 9 years, up to mid-January this year. And after that, I thought I would take a long break, but I couldn't. So now I'm attached to an organization called the Earth Innovation Institute. It's based in San Francisco. And I am there as to lead an initiative within EII, Earth Innovation Institute. It's called the Tropical Forest Champions. Tropical Forest Champions is a platform that that seeks to showcase jurisdictions at the subnational level and we showcase, we want to build a sustainable jurisdiction. And on this platform, we showcase their achievements. We showcase the data we use to verify their achievements. And we use the platform to seek collaboration in terms of investment and partners to help that jurisdiction go towards a sustainable pathway. Very simply, this is how we engage with the jurisdiction. We first see what public commitments they care to make on deforestation and greenhouse gas emissions and many more, such other commitments like SDGs, etc., etc. And then we track their actions. And if within 2 years that they produce actions out of these commitments, then we continue to let them be on the platform, the TFC platform. And after seeing the actions, if they start producing results, we allow them another 2 years on the platform. And the results then will mean if they show and deliver all the results, we hope to call them a green jurisdiction. Hopefully they become a preferred place for business and a preferred place for supply chains to come and either invest in or buy products from these jurisdictions. Now, here is just another snapshots of the platform. You will see results like this in the platform where you can see their deforestation rates in the jurisdiction. Here the greenhouse gas emissions by year in the jurisdiction, and maps showing their deforestation rates, and it goes quite detailed to district level deforestation rates, and it gets quite detailed. So that's what I do, and now I should get back to what are the challenges, right? Going back to the question. So have I stopped the slideshow yet, Bala? I have, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, good. Okay, so the challenges. I see 5 challenges in the next 2 decades. Top challenge. How do we keep the weakest in society fed and clothed? Whatever grand plans we have on to circumvent all these global challenges on the environment, it really boils down to helping the weakest links in society. The current pandemic is a good example. I don't know if many of you know, but the length of time we spend at home is really determined by the weakest in society. Because the weakest in society will not be able to stay home if they don't have enough food. So if they can't stay home, then we will have to stay home longer. So this is a very quick example of why we need to really think about keeping society fed and clothed in the next 2 decades, because that will determine whether we succeed in overcoming the biggest challenges we have, in particular climate change. Then the second challenge I see is this environmental movement that people talk about. I hope in these 2 decades, this environmental movement stops being a movement. It needs to be mainstream. And I know people say this a lot, but it takes quite a lot of change in your mindset to want to become mainstream. Number one, you have to learn how to talk like other people. So I always tell people, when civil society members, the language that you speak is really very foreign to a lot of other people. And I have some, shall we say, some experience in this, because I've been in the private sector, I've been in the non-profit sector, I've been in the sector that's in the middle between the two. And a lot of them are speaking very different languages. They might mean the same thing, but they speak very differently, and it's so hard to understand each other. Think about going mainstream. We are in trouble. Third, now, scientists have told us that we have 10 years, a decade, more or less, to put planet Earth on a good path to mitigate this 2 degrees, to keep us within 2 degrees of warming. Beyond 2 degrees, we know it will be hell on Earth. 2 degrees already would be hell on Earth, but beyond 2 degrees would make Earth unlivable. So the challenge is, how can we keep our future generation optimistic about this challenge? The new generation, the upcoming generation, they're already pretty disgusted with us. Yeah. and they're growing up. In the next decade, they'll be in their 20s, and they're in position, they're adults. What will it be like if we have a new generation of pessimists? That would mean that the fight will be all over for us, and we have to ditch plan A, which is to live on Earth, and all of this new generation will be thinking about plan B, which is looking for another planet. I mean, it may seem like a joke to people, but the reality is it looks real, yeah? Because if you go to and conduct a survey with the young, in some parts of the world, they are absolutely disillusioned with our generation. And to keep them optimistic about their future is going to be extremely difficult. The fourth challenge, I think, is this danger of the rise of populism, the rise of populist leaders, and the rise of populist politics. Solving global problems like global warming, or, climate change, or biodiversity loss is going to need countries to reach across borders and collaborate. And with populist leaders, that's not what they'd like to do. They are concerned about looking within. The world over is suffering the pains of having populist leaders. I hope it's a short cycle. But if we continue to have populist leaders and populist politics, the chances of solving great problems of this world will be less. Yeah. An example of why we need, a current example that we have now, this pandemic. For example, if Malaysia or Singapore, or, some parts of the world may come out of this pandemic quickly relative to others. But if we don't pour in help to the other neighboring countries, Myanmar, Indonesia, maybe Thailand, maybe Laos, maybe Cambodia, wherever, if we Malaysians don't help out these guys, it could be that we'll have another wave of this pandemic coming, and means that we will be locked down even longer. So we need to have this kind of non-populist leaders, real leaders, to reach across the borders to solve a lot of these big problems. That's the fourth one. The fifth, I think, is the fifth challenge is the shifting of the global power base from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere. I think everybody says it's going to be the Asian century, and I think in this transition from the north to the south, or from the west to Asia, we will see a lot of tensions between the old guard and the new guys. One of the things to look out for, I really think, is this China's move to exert its leadership, global leadership. Their Belt and Road Initiative, in my opinion, is a masterstroke, but it would mean that the trading routes that we've known for centuries will be gone. Yeah? That would mean a lot of pain for people on those shipping routes. That would mean that people on those shipping routes will be threatened by a sudden loss of income. But it also means that we have new routes to move people, new routes to move.
I just want to pick on two that you mentioned. One is on the populist politics, and the other one you mentioned about we speak the same language, yet we are not talking in the language that the other side understands. And the other side doesn't understand you either. And as long as we keep talking in strange languages, although we mean the same thing, we are not going to go ahead. When you mention populist politics, Daryl, can you give an example how this affects the way we manage our environment? Your mic is not on.
So an example would be populist politics, where we say, hey, let's forget about the United Nations because they don't serve this country well. So we stop funding United Nations and doing other things because we need to save our jobs in Malaysia, let's say. We need to do this and that, and let's not spend money on this very, fancy organization like the UN or the WHO or whomever, right? Those are those are populist politics, if you ask me. They play to the audience who probably a lot of them don't know any better in their own country. They play to their base, their voter base, and they will win the day in their country, but the world will suffer if everybody thinks like this. So that's just one example I can think of.
Thank you, Dr. Daryl, as speak. I believe there are some questions from the audience. Can I call upon Muhammad Hakim?
Hello.
Yes, Hakim, go ahead.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for giving this opportunity. I just want to ask a very simple question. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Is the conservation of environment is being affected by the policy maker, which consists of the politicians? Because it can be denied that today situation where every projects, every decision that is being made are based on the profit. Does this shows that the element of profit is being prioritized instead of the environment? And that is my question. Thank you.
Who would like to answer that? Shah, Daryl, Yasmin?
I can give it a go.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Yasmin.
I think the question was whether profit is over prioritized than over conservation, is it? Over environment.
Yes.
Yeah, I think to a large extent, it is always over prioritized than environment. And I think the challenge is for the people that work on an environment side or even economists to look at coming up with maybe values or indicators that can actually complement or at least balance the narrative behind the profit. And I think this is the reality. Profitability in some of these companies also go towards not just technology, but hiring people, employment, and so on and so forth. So I think this is a touchy subject matter. While we are all here passionate about conservation and maintaining the environment and status quo, at the end of the day, we have to be very mindful, and what Daryl Weber has mentioned as well, the needs of the people, job opportunities, skills, training, livelihood. All this also ties into that business side and perhaps comes from the profit side. So there is no really a straightforward answer to this, but to look at where are the best case studies out there that can actually demonstrate the best kind of balance. It could be a localized impact. It could be someone doing this and able to scale it up. And I think to date, we're still struggling to look at where are the successful case studies that can show us the pathway to how we balance economics and protection for the environment.
Thank you, Yasmin. Yeah. So, Shah, you want to give it a shot?
Okay. I think what is important is the owners of the business. Okay. So if I was a CEO and I have to report to a board, and the board tells me that I want you, Mr. CEO, to give the best return to shareholders. I want you to do better than last year. So what do I do? As a CEO or as a manager of the company, I will focus in doing my best to maximize profit for shareholder return. And that's my job. I'm paid to do that. So, and you can't blame the guy, okay? But what we need is a board, is the owners of the enterprise, owners of the conglomerates, the board, including the minority shareholders, stating to the CEO, look, we need to make money, yes, but that is not our first priority. our first priority is how does this company contribute back to society through the business that we do? How do we give back? And secondly, yes, we have to make profit, but not at the expense of the environment. We cannot shortcut to make profit by destroying the environment. Not at the expense of the workers. We cannot make profit but pay peanuts or exploit the workers. So this is the kind of board that we need. This is the kind of leadership that we need at even at large corporation. And I can see some corporation, are moving towards that. Even Lendlease probably, Yasmin. But we need to build more cooperation with this kind of board representative, this kind of questions where the conglomerates, the corporates, the big corporates themselves first ask the question, how does our business contribute to society? And how do we do the business without exploiting the workers, without ruining the environment. So that mindset, it has to go into a mindset change. It has to go into a behavioral change. And this MCO, this COVID has taught us so many things. It has taught us that we can live with less. We don't really need that whole bunch of things that we thought we need last time. It also taught us, as Dato mentioned, the really people at the bottom rung, not even the B40s, even lower than the B40s, how are they surviving? They need to go out and work on a daily basis. So how have society and how has businesses and corporate taken that role to actually be something bigger for society than just profitability? So that mindset change needs to start to come in. So that's my 10 cents worth, Bala.
Okay, thank you, Shah. That's more than 10 cents. That's about almost a ringgit.
Bala, can I?
Yes, sure, Dr. Daryl.
Yeah. So, I used to think that, all these people, these companies, they're profiteering, they're ruining things for us. And to a certain extent, it's true. But it's so easy to say that and push the blame over to that side. I don't know how many of you, us as Malaysians, really understand that we are the drivers of these kind of actions as Malaysians. And I'll give you one very concrete reason for that. So all of us, or most of us, contribute to KWSP, Employees Provident Fund. And we enjoy returns between 5 to 7% on most days. And some of us are contributors to the Amanah Saham scheme and other unit trust schemes. Now, all of these guys combined, they actually have a hand in virtually probably every public listed company in Malaysia. Right? Now, the reason why we are getting those dividends is because we, as contributors, expect high dividends. And to get high dividends, these companies must maximize profits. Now, I don't know how many of us have actually told EPF or Tabung Haji or our investment trust and say, hey, I want to get dividends, but I want to make sure that the companies that make those profits in the right way, in a sustainable way. If we don't do that, we are teaching all these companies to maximize profits in order to give us maximum dividends. That's my 2 cents.
Yes, Dr. Daryl, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think I was also going to mention every year towards March, we call it the circus, when EPF announces its dividends. Any drop in dividend, the entire country jumps up and curses EPF. Why is the dividend low? And for them to maintain that 5% or 6%, they need to invest in the most profitable companies. So, like you said, we are the drivers, but sometimes we don't see this and we tend to push the blame on others. Yep. So you got it right, Mac. Okay, there were a few questions. Let me see. There's a question by Julian. Julian asked, Julian, you asked, this is a question to Dato' Daryl. Dato' Daryl, earlier you mentioned that NGOs have to step up and raise their game. So do you anticipate they will evolve into profit-making businesses or just become more of the same?
No, I don't. I don't think it's about moving into profit-making business. So what I mean by step up their game, first realize you don't speak the right language, right? So I'll give you an example. A lot of, and I just gave a talk to my own institution, right, who are very research-oriented. A lot of people believe that if I give you the facts, the world will believe you and change. Yeah? And facts will win the day. It's complete rubbish. Science have told us that we humans buy things subconsciously. 95% of the time we buy stuff subconsciously, meaning we don't use any logic. We are driven by emotions to make a purchase. So when people buy ideas, they are not driven by logic. They are driven by emotions all the time. And then they justify, once they bought into it, they will justify their purchase with logic. So there's a saying in the world of marketing: people buy with emotions, but justify the purchase later with logic. And this is very true. If we always use logic, why do we have car advertisements the way we do today? If it was just with logic, the advertisement would be, just a spec sheet of the car and comparing with other models, and that's it. You make a decision because it's based on logic. No, today's advertisement on cars is about the smell, the feel, the ride. Usually, if it's for cars, there'll be a beautiful woman in there because men buy the cars too most of the time, and so on. So we speak different languages. The marketing guys know this. Civil society not necessarily know this. So that's the one small example. So first is, when I say up the game, is understand you don't speak the language and start to learn how to speak the language. Second, well, Casey, I think you need to go and check whether you buy with logic and then your emotion is zero. It's scientifically proven 95% of the time we buy with emotions. Now, the second thing I would say when I say raise the game, environmental movements, a lot of the times when they start the project, there is no end. They don't see an end to the project. They start without knowing where the end is. And the end should be the point at which you mainstream that work, right? And then you work back on how to mainstream it. I seldom see people start with that end. I always see people start and then it just grows and grows and grows and then forget about the end of mainstreaming. And that's about upping their game. I don't think necessarily you need to think about making profit. I do think you need to think about, if you really want to mainstream, then the moment you start a project, think about how to make it mainstream. And then you work back from there, right? The moment, and understand that you don't speak the right language, learn the right language. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Daryl. Since we brought up the topic of mainstreaming, let's go to that topic. For a long time, environment was managed and planned in isolation. I look after my tiger, you look after your trees, I look after your river. And most of the time, environmental planning was done in silo without taking into account of population growth, without taking into account of whether the economics was sound or otherwise. But now I think there's greater precision that we cannot separate these two topics. So how can we, again, the question to the speakers is, how can we mainstream this? How can we mainstream economics into environmental planning and mainstream environment into economics planning? Because otherwise we'll be back to the old style of working in silos. Yes, can I start with Dr. Yasmin? How do we mainstream?
Yeah, I think gradual mainstreaming is probably being undertaken as we speak. I think on the hindsight of some of the more depressing aspects of maintaining a sustainable future that we're talking about, I think in this present time there are more young people that are in the workforce that are more aware of this link between environment and economy. And not to mention, as they grow older, there'll be potential shareholders and stakeholders in big companies as well. So mainstreaming, I think, won't happen overnight. It will be a continuous upward battle and needs to be probably infused with a lot more advocacy and more enrichment in the education side. And I believe, give it some time, it will catch up. But on that, on the business side as well, I think there is also an awakening and recognition on the power of how shareholders can shape and direct how they want a company to perform. And I have to say, shareholders' awareness and knowledge, I mean, obviously you want your money to work hard for you, is also getting on the sustainability bandwagon soon. I think the question should be, how do we accelerate the mainstreaming of it? I think it's gradually happening in pockets. And maybe you're right, Dr. Bala, maybe it's already happening in silo as well, maybe even starting with certain industries. So I like maybe to even challenge the audience that's listening now to actually go back to your industry and whatever aspects that we have discussed today, to maybe do a checklist and see and benchmark whether your industry is up to par. And I think collectively we can look at where we can move as a nation towards that. I hope that was useful.
Okay, Yasmin, since you are on, there's a question from Max earlier. Max?
Max
from WWF, I think maybe your former colleague.
Hi, Max.
Max, are you still here? Yes, Max.
But he's got a question. Yeah.
Max, you can speak up if you want to. No, okay, I'll just read the question. He asked earlier that Dr. Yasmin mentioned that managing environment must be profitable. How can this be done?
One way, I think this is my personal experience, is looking at the evolution of business operations in business domains. So there's some information I'm not able to share right now, but I think there are companies that are evolving in its business framework to other areas that are friendlier, for instance, towards renewable, using better technology. And of course, this is also dependent on what sort of incentives are being rolled out by the government. So as government also want to look at jolting the industry to move towards a greener, more sustainable sector, it's almost like a give and take relationship now between these two sectors. So why is it profitable? It's profitable when the incentives make sense, right? There's always a caveat and catch there for companies to embark on something sustainable or green. And number two, it can be done when you have an opportunity in your company, or when you have shareholders that can shape the evolution of your DNA of your company. So for instance, a traditional, say, company, Achong, that does mechanics, every day buang minyak hitam and tires and all that. And maybe one day Achong will go and think about, I want to continue this. I suddenly I've got this calling. I want to be better for the environment, or my kids are pressuring me, or I feel bad, or I watch Al Gore, whatever your motivation is. It comes in many shapes and forms. And he says, I want to be in the mechanic industry. I want to fix cars, but I want to do it in a way that doesn't hurt the environment or hurt my children's future. And I've met several CEOs that are in that trajectory. The plastic industry as well. I need to see more CEOs like that, but there are always one or two that will say, this is how we're innovating plastics. This is how we're helping to promote sustainable fisheries through an innovative product that will not contaminate the sea through our RFID tagging. So these are the kind of solutions which, at the end of the day, you cannot work in silo. You really have to branch out to the sector, to the businesses, to the industry, to understand where are their pain points as well. Because they're probably suffering in silence, and we are also suffering in silence when we look at protecting the environment. So that conversation needs to be more on a neutral ground, to be more productive and more positive.
Thank you, Yasmin.
Thanks.
We are going to Shah next. Shah about mainstreaming, but Daryl, maybe you can look at Akila's question and prepare for it. Okay, Shah, go ahead. How do we do mainstreaming?
Oh, okay. First of all, I have to say I agree with Dato Daryl that we are the biggest culprit as individuals. We are still very selfish, and we can tell people to do things, but the fact is we are not doing much things ourselves. So let's start with ourselves. So how do we mainstream? First of all, we need to be able to story tell in a way that people understand, as Dato has mentioned. We should be able to connect the environment to people's daily lives so that they can see how important the environment is, especially the natural environment, our forests, our highlands, our river systems. Because to many people, even in the kampongs, they have been detached to they have detached themselves to see the importance of our natural heritage and our environment. I give you an example. When we wake up in the morning and we brush our teeth, we wash our face, we take our bath. Have we ever asked where that water come from? You know, from the tap water. And most of the time, people say it's from the tank. Okay, I'm going to cut the story short. So, is it from the tank? Where does the water from the tank come from? It's from the pipes. Where the pipes come from? It's from the reservoir, so forth, and then it eventually comes from the dams, and then you ask them, where does the water from the dam come from? Is it from the rain that falls in the dam? No, the water from the dam that feeds into uh, raw water and then treated water and into our tap comes from all the rivers that feeds into the dam, many rivers coming into the dam. But where does the river get the water from? That's the question. Because if the river dries up, your tap dries up. So the river gets the water from the forest. All our highland forests is our catchment area for the water that we have in our dams. So the point is, we are not telling a story to the consumers how nature, how the environment is actually so close to you on a daily basis that if you don't look after it, it's going to go. The Royal Bloom State Park, the forest in Royal Bloom, for example, powers four. It powers the Perak River, powers four dams, four hydro dams. I can't even imagine how many thousand gigawatts. We have the Temenggor Dam, Bersia Dam, Chendring Dam, all four dams coming from one river source. On top of that, the water intake for raw water, there's literally tens, I can't even remember how many, hundreds of them all over the Perak River. And the river that produce um, water for irrigation. So that's thousands of farmers. So the bottom line is we are not telling a story. We are not storytelling in a way that people understand the importance. To mainstream economics into nature, you have to feel the connect, There's so many initiatives such as the payment for ecological system, uh, green tax and all this, and the fact is it's not working. It's not working. So economics, when comes into the equation and create costs and affects profit, the corporates win. It doesn't work out. Look, I just want to make it clear, I'm not against big business. I'm not against corporate. I just want to have us to think whether the current business model is going to help us save this world. And Dato is correct again that many of us are being persuaded to buy stuff, to own stuff, to have stuff subconsciously by the big multinationals that producing all the consumables. So how do we mainstream economics? First of all, we need to make people understand how important the environment is, and to make that happen, we have to have a very clear and emotionally touching storytelling. People need to know how important it is to them personally, and then they probably will ask themselves, I want better sustainable businesses. I want to work with better sustainable business. Okay, Bala.
Okay, thank you, Shah. Let's now move on to Dr. Daryl to answer the question about the recent discussion at the World Economic Forum.
Okay, thanks. I'm not so sure if I got the context right, as I was not at the WF meetings. But so I think there was two. Let me just see the question again. So there was two elements to the question, right? One is about circular economy and the stakeholder capitalism.
Right.
So let me address the stakeholder capitalism bit and how to structure things. So I really think this is where investors and the stock markets, Bursa Malaysia, for example, have a huge role in this. So the world of capitalism, in particular public listed company, has become quite sick today, if you ask me. And it needs to move from a shareholder approach to capitalism to a stakeholder approach to capitalism. In the past, it was quite a balance, but now it's completely over to shareholder capitalism. Now, the first and foremost, if you ask me, the most damaging practice in the public listed companies especially is quarterly reporting. So these quarterly reports, every quarter, these analysts come out and they analyze all the quarterly reports. And I don't know if you know how many of you have been in listed company. I used to work with listed companies. The amount of time spent to massage these reports is incredible. And literally, many companies live from quarterly report to quarterly report, trying to show growth every quarter. Now, you know what this trains the companies to do? It trains the companies to think only on a 3-month horizon. When if you think about sustainability, it talks about a long-term horizon. So we, as shareholders and Bursa, we are training companies to think short-term. 3 months, actually, we're training companies to think for. So if you ask me how to encourage stakeholder capitalism, ban quarterly reporting, number one. Number two, stop shareholder buybacks. It's not so prevalent here in Malaysia, but in the US and a lot of other countries, shareholder buybacks is a big activity. I don't know if you know what shareholder buybacks are. So shareholder buyback it's not dividend to shareholders. This is on top of dividends. So companies, if they earn profits, they use their profits not to give dividend. They give dividends, but on top of that, they buy shares, the shares back from the shareholders at good prices. Now that by doing so, it increases the share price of the company without actually creating value. The company did not create value, they just bought back shares. So they did two things. They increased the value of the company by not creating value. And number two is they're bribing the shareholders to continue to be shareholders because the shareholders could easily sell their shares again and again and again and again. Now this is a bad habit that's being developed at the moment. When you raise the value of your company based on nothing, just by buying back shares, that will create short-term thinking again. And this is exactly what has happened now in this pandemic. I don't know if many of you realize, but like some ridiculous number, something like 90% of all profits in the US made by the Fortune 500 companies last year went to share buybacks. So they have very little money saved from their profits for tough times. So you can see now everywhere in the world that in just 1 month or 2 months of inoperation because of the pandemic, they have to lay off staff. That's not common sense. I know in the organization I ran in the past, we had 2 years operational budgets. Yeah, 2 years operational reserves. Now, why are public listed companies not asked to do so? So again, this is about shareholders and bursas or share markets teaching companies or allowing companies to think short term. And this is really what you call shareholder capitalism. I also think one way to structurally increase stakeholder capitalism, or promote stakeholder capitalism, is for the authorities to impose a fixed percentage of revenue that goes into sustainability initiatives. I think it's about time. I mean, asking them to do it voluntarily is not evidently not working. So that's on the moving towards stakeholder capitalism. And on the circular economy, I don't have much to say except for the fact that businesses wanting to do circular economy today will find it too expensive. And this is where policies need to be there to ensure the circular economy gets a kickstart, to encourage these businesses to start so that you can have a big enough scale so that it becomes profitable. That's on circular economy.
Thank you, Dr. Daryl. While we were talking about mainstreaming, there were a few comments. I'd like to call Khatijah. Khatijah, you had some comments about mainstreaming and associated costs. You want to add on?
Yeah, yeah. It just came across my mind when we talk about when Dr. Yasmin was mentioning about some businesses, the way they evolve into taking into consideration of environment. That what came across my mind immediately was, yeah, big company is easy to do that because probably if there is any other additional cost to that, they can like how to say contra it to other, yeah. So
Yes.
I relate it to, again, especially because I work in a certification environment. So always the issue is to do these changes. It always comes with cost. So it's not easy. I was just commenting on that. That's what make business think twice about changing, making into environment into one of their consideration into their business domain. So
Yeah, and I think Khatijah, to add on to it, this current pandemic is also going to be a double-edged sword, simply because when you look at, I mean, the construction sector is hit so bad by it, and if you put into things that are of a hierarchy of priority, oftentimes certain things about sustainability seem to be the easiest thing to let go. And then revisit it later. You know what I mean? And I'm sure you've seen your fair share of that as well.
true.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think certification, Khadija, what you're doing is great work. It's the fundamental to legitimacy of, verifying how structures are built or systems are in place. But I think in your field, you probably also have seen companies that are moving beyond just certifications. Am I correct?
Yes, you're correct. Well, because I was thinking of that because we are talking about mainstreaming. So mainstreaming is not just talking about big companies, but how small and medium companies or individual with those element can do that also. So
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm just going to jump on this conversation, Dr. Bala. While the focus is on big corporates, big companies, and so on and so forth, I think there's also the SMEs that we're not touching on, the importance of them in innovation, corporate innovation and technological innovation to move towards mainstreaming sustainability in their businesses. And you count the number of SMEs we have in this country, I think we're probably close to 900,000 now. That could be a conservative number. And that is a very big number to look at moving and shaking a sector that actually has massive impact on the environment, maybe not talk much about, but has room to improve as well.
Yes, Yasmin, I think you are completely right. I think the number of SMEs is probably close to 1 million now. And again, when it comes to environment, they are the neglected portion. And true, their impact is tremendous. And while we focus on the few big companies, they are often we forget by SMEs, and I think that sector has a long way to go. Okay, I'm going to move to another topic on financial incentives, right? Because we are running out of time. But before we go to the incentives, I'm just giving the speakers head start. I'm going to take one question from Quack. Quack, you want to ask the question yourself about the shock to the economy?
Hi, Quack, don't be shy.
Okay, let me read out his question then. What is a suitable shock to the economy that will change how businesses work? And is the COVID-19 pandemic enough? Enough meaning, is it a big enough a shock to make businesses change?
Oh, I think the pandemic is a massive shock. It's a massive realization as well. And I'm sure many of you are very familiar with all these news of the Malacca River now clean, can see fish, Langkawi, blue sky, clean air. And I think some of us are celebrating a little bit premature on how the environment is winning now and nature is, claiming back her glory days. That is a clear indication of how anthropogenic activities, and these are all because we are driving ourselves to work. Millions of us use vehicles to work for companies that are also contributing to certain environmental damage. At the end of the day, like it or not, I think we ourselves and individuals need to put ourselves into perspective into how we equate our role in the companies that we work for. Those of you in the oil and gas, those of you with the ministries, those of you with technology companies. I mean, it would be great if all of us understand where our sustainability stand is with the company. And as an employee, how do we also look at moving that needle a little bit so that we can form and shape a new kind of company that puts sustainability on a bigger pedestal. Again, I think my plea to all is, because I'm looking at these comments and we are 2020 now, and some of these comments are so still 2008. So we need to perhaps keep ourselves a little bit more updated on some of these innovations that are happening and be a solution provider. I think one of my biggest challenge is day in, day out hearing about what should the government do? What should the private sector do? What should this do? What should it do? But the most important question is what you should do is not being asked. And you're a worker, you're an employee, you buy shares, you purchase things, you buy cars, you educate your children. So sustainability begins at home with you. Thanks, Doc.
Thank you, Yasmin. Quick, I just share my views whether the COVID-19 pandemic is big enough to shock to companies. It might shock them in many ways, but when it comes to environment, I think the pandemic could be disastrous for the environment. Yes, in the short term, we are seeing cleaner rivers, cleaner air. That is short term. That's common sense, right? Because people are not going out. But I think the biggest impact COVID-19 has on the environment is through its economic impact. When people lose jobs, when people lose their livelihoods, when state governments don't have revenues, the first thing they're going to do is exploit natural resources. And that's when we're going to start seeing impacts. And in fact, this morning session, Julian Hyde was telling us how in islands in Sabah, because tourism is down to zero, local population have lost their livelihood, fish bombing has started in a large scale. So yes, in the short term, you might see clean rivers, but in the long term, the economic impact will be disastrous to the environment. So that's my view. Anyway, we are now going to the topic of incentives. In the topic of financial incentives to protect the environment, we are talking about green taxes, payment for ecosystem services, green bonds, and all sort of green things, right? Like Shah said, some of them don't work, or he said all of them don't work. Although I think some of them do work. So I like to get the views of the speakers. What you feel about these incentives, and what's the way forward? Can we maybe start with Dato Daryl first?
Okay, I thought I muted myself. So incentives. So I've got I can't really talk about particular incentives, but I would like to talk about the current, people are talking about the post-COVID era, right? How do we get out? How do you make this a V-shaped recession instead of a U-shaped or W-shaped recession? Now, I've been from many countries in the world today are thinking that the way out of this recession is to stimulate green growth. Yeah. This has already been done by South Korea in 2008. South Korea, India's stimulus package in 2008 at the financial crisis. 80% of their stimulus package went to green growth. And that really helped them get out of the recession. They're renowned for getting out of that recession much quicker than most countries. And just last week, I think it was announced with the new government in South Korea, they are going to do the same again to get out of this current economic situation that they're in right now. Many countries, many leaders at the moment are thinking about doing the same. And I hope Malaysia will really think so. I've been telling everybody I meet, that's the way to get out of this recession. Why? Because creating new economies creates jobs faster. Creating a new economy brings innovation and may actually reduce our dependency on natural resources. So I feel that if we do have a stimulus package, a more comprehensive stimulus package coming out to help us get out of this current situation, economic recessions, I hope the government does two things. One is create new economies, green growth economies, because it creates jobs faster. No use trying to revive the old economies. Yeah, some old economies just have to be left alone. But where there's old economies that we need, essentially, old economies around, we have to reframe those old economies to be more relevant, to be sustainable. Yeah, agriculture is an old economy. We need to reframe it. If we don't reframe it, if we don't take the opportunity to do it now, we will be stuck in the same mess again, right? Stuck in a cycling down of practices, good practices for the economy. So I hope the incentives that come out post-COVID will drive two things: bring new economies, green growth economies, hopefully, and reframe old economies towards a more sustainable pathway.
Thank you, Dato Daryl. Still on the topic of incentives. So maybe Shah, you want to give it a shot? I know earlier you said you don't think it works, but yeah, elaborate, please. Is Shah still here? I can't see Shah in the screen. Anyway, while waiting for Shah to come on, let's go to Dr. Yasmin.
With whatever little experience I have in currently in my stint with a private company, when we kickstart developing new businesses, new business opportunities, towards a greener business opportunity, I like to say without revealing too much, one of the key elements we look at is on financial incentives. I think sometimes the quantum of these incentives, and if you check, let's say if you're going towards renewable energy, there are multiple incentives out there, and some you fulfill, some you don't fulfill. So I think when you look at sikit dapat discount here, there, can save here and there, it actually is something companies look for. At the end of the day, if I can spend less, why not? If I can get a little bit of tax reliefs, why not? So in our investment papers and all that, one of the key things we always have to list down is where are the opportunities for incentives. So I think this is just a conventional way to look at leveraging on incentives as well. But I think with more incentives, it should be a sign and indication to attract more private conversion into green technology, for instance. Over to you, Doc.
I think Malaysia has experimented many things. I think we have always talked about PS, payment for ecosystem services. There were attempts to do biobanking in Sabah. I think Dato' Daryl might know this. The more common one is fiscal transfers between federal and state. This has also been asked many times, but we don't really, like what Shah said, we don't really have a very strong working model. In recent years, there was this attempt by hydropower companies, PNB plus several other micro hydro producers to go into the PES model. I think some of you might know the TNB now pays Perak state government X million ringgit a year for the use of water. And similarly in Kedah, in Kelantan, the new micro hydro players also have, this is stated in their contract about PES, means they have to compensate state government for producing electricity. So I don't know, but we've been talking about this for many, many years now. So with no real light at the end of the tunnel. And maybe here, I think now I can ask Quek to speak on this. I hope you found your buttons. That ministry has also been experimenting with this. Quek, would you like to add on? Yes, Quek, go ahead. Okay, so we can't hear you, Quek. Okay, never mind. And for some reason, we have also lost Shah. Do you all see him in the screen? No, right? But never mind. I just want to move to another topic. No, we talked about how private sector is managing their impact, but in terms of their contribution to the national agenda, one is managing their own impacts, but the other is their contribution towards the national agenda. Many of them have CSR programs and so on. So again, the question is, are they doing enough? If they are not doing enough, are there particular areas where they can do more? So will Dato' Daryl or Yasmin want to answer this? Or is Quek ready to answer the earlier question? Okay, I think Quek is not ready because we can't hear him. Maybe I'll leave it to Dato' Daryl and Yasmin. Let's talk a bit about CSR and are they doing enough?
Well, I think a lot of companies, especially the smaller ones and less sophisticated ones, without capacity to think through things, they start off with the right intentions to do maybe CSR or philanthropy or whatever, but inevitably, they get scorned upon. They will get the scowls of some of the NGO community saying they're not doing enough, it's spending it the wrong way, and all that stuff. So one avenue that these organizations, the private sector, can do much better is to have better dialogues with people who know better on aspects of CSR or sustainability or the environment. I think they need to have better dialogues. There needs to be more avenues for the two sectors, the civil society sector and the private sector, to have dialogues, because they need knowledge and knowledge together with action. Some of these companies, even if they want to do the right thing, they don't know how to go about doing the right thing. They end up doing the wrong thing, for example. So, I remember years ago, some people thought, oh, reef balls, that's the best thing in the world to do for the reefs. Then turns out it's the wrong thing to do for the reefs. Yeah, I think private sector can do much better in terms of dialoguing with the civil society or experts on the environment or on sustainability. One thing I want to touch, Bala, that I didn't get to answer on the whole economics and environment, right? And breaking silos. Can I have a minute for that?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So I didn't get to mention, and this is one of my big worries also. To break these silos, it has to come from the top governing structure of the country, right? Malaysia, the Malaysian government, right? At the leadership level. Now, if we want environmental elements throughout all the decision making in the finance sector, private sector, whatever, the person sitting in that seat, the leadership seat of the environmental side of things, need to be someone of caliber and of passion. Otherwise, you cannot break those silos. You might as well just sit there and breathe oxygen, take in oxygen. That's it. So, because that's the reality. Unfortunately, the reality is Malaysia sees ministries like this as a junior ministry, as a cost center rather than a sector a center that delivers benefits to the organization. Now, and I think we also, as Malaysians, we deserve the leaders we get, really.
Yeah.
So if we don't ask for the right caliber leader to sit in that position, then we get the wrong kind of people with no passion towards the environment. We've seen this time and time again.
Yep.
So if we really want to mainstream the environment and have this breaking of silos, we really have to make sure that the person sitting in that seat has the right caliber, has the right passion. If not, just take in oxygen and don't do anything else.
More cost effective that way. I do agree, Dato, absolutely with you. I think leadership is one topic which we should have touched on much earlier as well. Sustainability leadership, which should come from a cross-sectorial perspective as well. No point having a great sustainability guru in a particular industry when you don't have the equivalent in the governing side or from the NGO side. And maybe a couple of 2 cents about this quote-unquote CSR. I think to a certain sector, these are probably acronyms that some people are not happy with, but still continue to be used for the corporate sector. I think the word time and time again has been used maybe very shallowly, or maybe of different degrees. I mean, for certain companies, maybe it's just a one-time 20,000 activity, clean a river, okay, cuci tangan, let's go home and feel good about ourselves. But there are also some companies that look at CSR as a form of investment on communities and social activities. And I think I've seen, and then some of these private companies don't even talk about it. Some of them are just maybe have responsibility towards people and environment embedded in the DNA. And I've met really amazing leaders in this sector who look at investing in social enterprise, helping them scale up, helping create employment for B40 so that they can look at creating new jobs as guardians of rivers. They tie in very creatively the social environmental element very strongly. And 2 words, I think, if I can just highlight to the audience here, is the importance of multi-stakeholder engagement and partnerships in driving really tangible changes. Lastly, tangible, measurable, and tangible impacts. We can say I spent $1 million doing CSR, and you got featured in the newspaper, which probably gave you a lot of revenue, media revenue in return. But when you get down to the ground and measure that real impact, what is that difference that CSR is making to its people or to the environment, and how do you measure it? So I think putting that aside, not just private sector, government, NGO, private sector, all also probably need to move towards a more accountable way of how we all do things. I'm not saying some of us may be struggling with how we measure, monitor, and assess how we do the work for sustainability. And I don't think it's a challenge that lies with just the private sector. I think it's a current challenge that lies with the other players as well. So until we start deep diving into these indicators, having transparency, good governance, good performance, accountability, verification, transparent reporting to shareholders, I think the role of private sector still remains very strong, especially in driving innovations and changes. But its roles can be stronger if we have the right balance of elements around, the right policies, the right kind of government in place, and the right kind of population that really wants to see this difference being made. If at the end of the day, if we Malaysians don't know what they want for the sake of sustainability, then it will be still a wishy-washy kind of scenario. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. One of the areas where there has been a major change in public-private sector behavior, and Dr. Daryl knows this very well, with RSPO and certification, right? And that has been a massive global effort to get private sector to change behaviors towards a more sustainable future. And I think you have a lot of lessons learned from there. And Dr. Daryl, can you share that experience?
That's a book in itself, Bala. So I think, look, the biggest lesson I learned is nobody wakes up from bed wanting to be mean and nasty to the environment. So far, I've not met someone who does that. Right? That's number one. When I first entered into this discussion way back in 2004, 2005, I realized, and I was very fortunate because I used to be in the private sector, right? And then I was in civil society. So I have the benefit of being able to look at both sides of the fence. And I realized that these guys were not talking the same language. They were at cross purposes. So the a lot of these things, as I think Yasmin mentioned, we can overcome with good dialogue had in good faith. And when I say good dialogue, means it must be robust. You must be willing to challenge each other. And that really is the secret of RSPO's success. We created a platform that allowed for robust dialogue and allowed for, we had zero taboo subjects. There were no taboo subjects. Every subject could be discussed in a safe environment. That was my job, to create that safe environment. And but having the right people around the table. So the big lesson for me is these dialogues, they must be had. We cannot have a taboo subject, and we cannot stop questions, people from asking the questions, because solutions can only come if questions are asked. And if we don't have enough questions, we don't have enough solutions. That's one. Second, the RSPO, credit to RSPO success came about also not because of the companies that were there, but it also boiled down to the individuals who the company sent at these discussions. The individuals had to be people who had the right intent, who were motivated by a higher purpose, who were able to put down the company hat, and put on a human being's hat, let's say, the hat of a human being, the hat of a stakeholder. I think these are the two big lessons.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Daryl. And it's 4:45 now, and it's fasting first day of Ramadan, and people need to go off early. So I'm going to wrap up soon. But if Quack's microphone is working, I can allow Quack to ask the question. Quack, is your microphone already working? No.
Okay.
No, his mic is still not working. It's okay. Maybe another time, Quack. So ladies and gentlemen, we spoke about many things, from the role of private sector to financial incentives to a better business model and many other things. And I think one of the things that struck me as very vital is we need to maintain communications and learn to speak in a common language. And as Dato' Daryl pointed out, is often we speak in very alien languages that does not reach out to our stakeholders, right? So I'm going to give Dr. Daryl and Yasmin a couple of minutes to wrap up and say your final words. And we're still waiting for Shah. I just called him. Apparently, there's a thunderstorm at his place, and his internet has kaput. So he's trying to join. So, but never mind. Let me go with Dr. Yasmin. Maybe 2 minutes to just summarize what you said today.
I cannot, I think, express or highlight the importance of sustainability communication. And I think in my new job, that's the bulk of the work I do. And my communication skills is really tried and tested because my internal stakeholders are as varied as you can think. From the guy that manages construction workers to the guy that actually sits in the office and looks at waste management, to the lady who operates the malls that we own, to the person who is in charge of energy and water consumption. And they all come from different walks of life. And I always have to, I'm the sustainability sales girl in my office, to be honest, where I go down there. And before I go down there, there's so much preparation to understand their perspective of where they feel sustainability is in their daily job. It is part of the job, but I'm not sure in a hierarchy of importance, is it okay only lah, I follow what my boss do, or I understand what I'm doing. So I have to deal from directors right up to construction workers with a singular message. And I think the trying times come when I myself, hear myself trying to work out and figure out what are the right words, right sentences to say so that they get it. And you put this in a multicultural situation that escalates, the challenge escalates a little bit more. You got to talk to the Chinese contractor differently, and you've got different cultural understanding about sustainability. So for me, it's important. And then further on to that, you're talking about how you then look at using communication to change behaviors, to change attitudes, to change mindsets, whether for your employees or for our children in schools. So I think that key element is less studied. I see more papers being published about it now in the local landscape. It's encouraging. I probably need more about it. And second, more important thing apart from communication is the art and skill of stakeholder management. And I think in the last 2 months, the skill sets in this area is super critical in order to make more tangible impacts for good sustainable efforts. Over to you, Doc.
Okay, thank you very much, Yasmin. Dato' Daryl, maybe 2 minutes.
Yeah, 2 minutes. Okay. I think all of us, I think, attend this discussion here because we are passionate about the environment. I think most of us are passionate about the environment or biodiversity or some greater thing apart from the material stuff of money and just stuff. Yeah. Now, but we forget that those who are here, especially in particular, are very powerful, and yet we do not use this power enough. Yeah, we are investors, directly or indirectly. We are the people responsible for allowing or for having the leaders we have in this country. We are people who shape the minds and the thinking of our relatives, our friends, our social circles, who can then have a ripple effect to spread all sorts of news throughout the world, throughout the nation. Yet we find, I look at the chat and we're talking about, we must have better leaders, we must have better laws. We forget that we have that power in our hands. Now, I just want to leave you with this thought. Most countries signed on to the Paris Agreement to mitigate climate change. Most countries signed on to the SDGs. Yeah. The hard work actually has been done by governments. It's not easy, bringing 100 over governments to agree on any damn thing and signed on climate change, on the SDGs. It's already done deal. Governments have agreed. Now, how many of us have held the government accountable to delivering on these promises? That's our job, because we vote them in. So how many of us have asked the government, hey, macam you punya performance SDG, climate change, cakap saya want to reduce by 20% or 50% or whatever percent. Where is this in your manifesto coming up for the next election? We don't ask this, right? But in fact, governments they've already made that commitment. We don't hold them accountable, and this is the power we have. We don't ask the EPF, for example, how are you investing our money?
Yes.
We don't ask Tabung Haji, how are you investing our money?
Yep.
And so on and so forth. So I think we forget that we have a lot of power, but it's so easy. It's quite easy actually to blame somebody else lah, government lah, Tuan Minister lah, or somebody else, or me lah. So
Companies.
companies as well. You know, I get Yasmin, you're already so defensive being on the company side now.
I have to.
Level one.
I have to.
Denial, level one.
public.
Okay, that's my 2 cents.
Okay, Dr. Daryl, Yasmin, thank you very much. Everyone, we're going to end soon. So, like I said, we always bring in the best speakers, and I think with Dr. Daryl and Dr. Yasmin, they are as good as it gets. If you both of you don't mind, I'm sure many of the participants would like to contact you, ask for your advice. If you want, you can share your email in the chat section. If
Sure,
anybody
will do.
wants to contact you, ask for advice, if you don't mind, you can share your email with them. And with that,
Certainly.
everyone, thank you again very much for joining us. There are 2 other sessions on Monday. Do join us. And I like to end by stating the EPF syndrome that Dr. Daryl mentioned and I mentioned earlier. So every time EPF mentions dividends, everybody gets upset if it's less than 6%. But nobody asks where they invest. Nobody seems to like profit, but they like high dividends. Yeah?